It is my distinct pleasure to introduce two very respected CEOs to this event. Jeff, CEO of LinkedIn, aka my big boss, although I know he wouldn't like this title. Since he took over CEO of LinkedIn in 2008, Jeff scaled LinkedIn globally. We now have 590 million members globally, worldwide, a 20x increase from 10 years ago. The platform now supports 23 languages, of which 8 are in Asia-Pac. And we now have offices in 30 cities. And not surprisingly, under his leadership, revenue grew from 78 million to 5 billion. Jeff is also well loved by LinkedIn employees. Cited by Glassdoor in the last few years as among the top CEOs. Piyush Gupta, our guest, is no stranger to everyone here in this room. He's the CEO of DBS, a bank that every resident in Singapore and Asia is familiar with. Under your leadership, Piyush, DBS transformed to a bank that allows everyone to live more, bank less, promoting simpler, seamless, and invisible digital banking. DBS twice recognized as the world's best digital bank by Euromoney and the world's best bank by Global Finance magazine in 2018. As a Singaporean, I'm so proud to use PayLah and bank with DBS.
All right, I love you already.
This is why she's running sales for us in the region. You haven't figured it out already.
And by the way, the one thing you haven't mentioned, you got to figure, the only way you get to be CEO is to grow a beard.
But pattern recognition.
But if you keep your hair on and you're really good looking, you get to be a really cool CEO.
Well, let's put our hands together and welcome the two CEOs. So my first question for both of you, having just heard from what Olivia had shared, as business leaders overseeing global organizations, how are you seeing these three trends, AI, automation, skills gap, independent work, impacting your organizations or just organizations globally, especially those in traditional industries?
Go ahead, Jeff.
So with regard to the three trends specifically, at LinkedIn, I don't know that we're altogether dissimilar from some other companies, more traditional companies perhaps, but with regard to AI and automation, one of the things that our leadership team, take for example our CFO, is trying to identify are areas where there's a lot of repeated tasks at scale. And his hypothesis is that if we can apply AI and the right technology, we can shift the work that is required of people on his team to leverage more of their uniquely human skills, some of the things that Olivier had just mentioned. But in addition to that, creativity, critical reasoning, being able to connect dots and synthesize information in ways that the machines aren't quite capable of doing as of yet. So that's one of the things that we're currently thinking about. More germane to our business is something we've been working on for really since the inception of the company. And while it wasn't referred to as AI back then, it was more along the lines of machine learning. Data powers everything we do at LinkedIn. Everything that you experience, the personalization and the relevancy of your feed, the jobs that we suggest, the people you may know, you name it, and our ability to leverage data in a high value added way to generate the right relevancy algorithms and matching recommendations is leveraging some of those new technologies. So it really helps us create a lot of value for both our members and our customers. And I think these are two examples that are certainly relevant for other companies, whether those are digital companies who were founded in the cloud or whether or not they're companies that are going through their own digital transformations. Olivier didn't get into all the specifics in terms of skills gaps, and the one skills gap he did mention on interpersonal skills to me is still so interesting and a little bit counterintuitive for a world that's increasingly focused on advanced technology. But certainly one of the skills gaps that we continue to see proliferating in the area of advanced technology is something that is now going to be experienced by all companies. So it's no longer enough to say there are tech companies in the valley and then there's more traditional companies elsewhere. In a sense, as these companies increasingly go through their digital transformations, they are tech companies too. And so the supply-demand imbalance, I don't think, is going to be fulfilled anytime soon. I think if anything, you're going to see an intensifying battle for talent on a global basis. And it's important that companies, whether it's LinkedIn Talent Insights, whatever tools you have at your disposal, it's so important for companies to understand the implications of how advanced technologies are going to change the roles within your organization, where it's going to displace jobs, where it's going to create jobs, where you need to reskill the workers that you currently have, where you need to source talent from outside the company. And it's incumbent upon all of our organizations to better understand these workforce trends.
Piyush, I'm sure you speak to many CEOs across the world. What have you seen what organizations are doing?
Well, I think fairly similar to the kinds of things Jeff talked about. But let me tell you, for me, the possibilities of AI are actually at two different levels. One's just killing the grunt work. So, RPA, robotic process automation. And that's really not even AI so much. It's just figuring the computer can do a lot of, ordinary steps. And that kills a lot of stuff we thought was work, but really is not work. So it really changes the nature of definition of work itself. In DBS, we have a concept called failure demand. And failure demand really focuses on the things that you think, you do because there's a failure somewhere to do it the right way. Anecdotally, I'll tell you something. I used to do a job many years ago in India, chief of staff for the Indian business at Citi. And I used to work really hard. I had to work till 11 at night, every night. Then I got promoted to do the same job in Singapore for the entire region. I used to get done by lunch. And I realized the big difference then was...
What did you do after lunch, by the way? You're going to get to that?
I twiddled my thumbs.
Oh,
I twiddled my thumbs. I went to my boss and said, better give me something to do because, I don't have work. But the difference was that everything I thought was work in India was really making the system work. Somebody said a mail's going to come, you'd have to follow up 4 times. The lights wouldn't work. So you were working on what I today call failure demand. AI and machines allow you to eliminate that. So, of course, that leads into a different thing. We found at DBS some years ago that we were going to basically wind up with 1,500 jobs we didn't need because the computer can do it. But that means you've got to reskill the people. And you've got to think about what you're going to do with the people and how do you migrate the people. So it leads back to your skills thing. I'm going to come back to that. But the second level to me of AI is actually a step beyond that. It's not just automating the processes, getting RPA, etc. It is really that the computer can think in ways that you can't think. It can recognize patterns. It can do through regression, neural things. So you can start doing things which a human being could never do. And that actually in many ways is facilitative. It's not job replacement always. So we give better advice for wealth management. Our people can do better work in terms of identifying fraud. We can figure whether a ship going from here to the US was actually, busting sanctions. We could never do this stuff before. But it needs more people to work with the AI to be able to achieve this. Both create the tools, but also interpret the tools. So I think the AI in this thing has got, clearly it's a game changer. Nature of work is changing from that standpoint. What that leads to is, I guess, the second thing, that, the whole nature of what you call more independent working. I have to say, I'm not seeing that much of it around Asia yet. I'm saying, you mentioned it, it's only 10% in Singapore. I also think that you'll see some headwinds in the direction you're talking about because people are increasingly beginning to figure the downside of the gig economy is that the social security net is lost, right? So you're living in a company, you get medical benefits, you get, a future. Now you're completely on your own. You start every morning with a zero sheet and say, got to make my buck for the day or for the week. And I think at a socio-political level, governments are beginning to worry about what does it mean and how do you create a net for these people. However, as a general concept, what you said is right. Baby boomers will be more productive for the next 30 years, and a lot of people want the flexibility to work. I think in a strange way, you're finding that you can actually do this within the construct of a company. And I'm finding one of the most powerful transformations we're making is to drive that same degree of independence and flexibility, i.e. internal entrepreneurship. So to me, the other big change that's happening is, we always used to run command and control organizations. And for 30 years, the Harvard Business Review has always told you this is not the best way to manage. But that's the way you manage because Max Weber and the bureaucracy, 100 years ago when he defined it, he defined why pyramidal structures are more efficient. But technology changes all that. And you can actually collaborate in different ways. People can do stuff on their own. They can work on more flex time and they can be more entrepreneurial even within a company. So if you add that into the ambit of, working for yourself, I think there's a lot more of that that's going to go on. Finally, to your skills gap, I think you're right. There's a big skills gap, but I have two comments to make. One of the big things we did at DBS, and why we think we're a little contrarian to most banks, we decided that we're not going to try and find only a new set of people with a new set of skills. We made a bet that you can retrain the old people, that you can reskill the old people. And my favorite story around this is I went back to India, to Delhi, in 2013. My dad is at that time 85. And I figured at the end of the day, he'd done his banking online, he'd paid his taxes online, he'd bought something on Amazon for my mother, a nightie or something. And I figured, this guy is 85 years old, he's changed in his personal life. But I think people who are 30 and 40 can't change in the professional life. Why is that? I don't need everybody to be a coding expert, but I need them to be able to change the way they do stuff. Now, the human brain is the same. Then it can only mean that there is the environmental conditions which are different. At work, there's too much risk. It's not easy. But at home, somebody teaches you how to do this stuff, and you fool around, and you download a few apps, and you get there. So I think that really, kindred, I think that we're going to change everybody. And so far, we've been relatively successful in being able to migrate and teach people how to operate within a company with the new thing. What that means is I don't have different kinds of people. I have everybody as part of the journey and trying to drive change. It's unusual for a legacy company. You start with a lot of different kinds of people. But I was also reminded, I'm not sure you saw the Reed Hastings interview on YouTube, the Netflix guy. Somebody asked him, where are you finding all these new skills? He said, I'm hiring the people you're firing, which is, I think, just fantastic, right? So that's one, this thing on skills. The other thing, I think, around skills, by the way, you talked about soft skills, but you talked about leadership management and so on. I think one of the things that you're probably not even seeing in your data yet, but in my view, in the next 10 years, we will see, is a lot of the things we need are really the soft skills. You will need philosophy, you will need psychology, you will need emotional science. Because I think the biggest challenge for society in the next 10 years is we got to reimagine the rules of society. What does it mean to let AI run your life? What does it mean to have data privacy or lack of data privacy? How do we want to operate as a species? Right? What is okay and what is not okay? I don't think regulation will find the answer. I think we collectively as people will have to say, what do we think is okay for us and what is not okay? And to do that, you don't need just the STEM skills. I think you're going to need all of the skills that we developed over hundreds of years and think about what makes us human. Why are we the way we are and what do we want to achieve as people? I think you'll find a lot more of those skills also being required. So I think the skills gap is going to be multifaceted.
Yeah. So Piyush, that's very interesting that you mentioned about the deep soft skills. And that brings about my next question about technology having brought about many benefits to humanity, but there's the dark side that you kind of alluded to. So what do you think about the unintended consequences of technology and platforms that is reaching millions and billions, impacting these people today? Jeff, can you share?
So before I get to the unintended consequences, and it's actually related, the last point that you made, I think is so important. There's a lot of discussion about how AI will take over the world and you'll have these evil overlords in terms of these machines, and this dystopian future is a possibility. And what people fail to see in those consequences and in those scenarios is the fact that we're the ones that are originally going to be creating the algorithms. And so to the extent the same engineers and the same scientists who are developing these algorithms are trained in ethics, are deeply understand compassion, and are writing their algorithms accordingly, I think we can control the future more than we are currently anticipating. And so to your point about these deeper skills, I think, and we were meeting with the Minister of Education earlier today, who was talking about the importance of not boxing children or young adults into a particular stream or a particular domain or a particular discipline, and how critical it is, by way of example, to ensure that data analytics is taught cross-disciplinary, because you could make the argument no matter what role you play in the world, data can create more value and understanding of data and analysis. And not dissimilarly, our future engineers, our future PhDs, to the extent that they understand what it means to be human, I think that can shape the future in a very positive way. In terms of unintended consequences, more specifically, it feels like every week there's a new headline about a major technology company that made a decision years ago that is now coming home to roost, and it's unintentional. I can tell you, knowing the leaders at these companies, They have the best of intentions. They had the best of intentions when they founded their organizations, when they created their mission, when they created their vision, when they went out and they built these brilliant breakthrough products. But if you don't proactively anticipate how these breakthroughs could potentially go off the rails and start to destroy value instead of creating value, then you may run into a future where that's exactly the case. And I think one of the things as business leaders, I'm sure you feel similarly, at LinkedIn, we talk a lot about the fact it's not just about the what. It's not just about what we're trying to accomplish, our mission, our vision, or the results that we're trying to generate. It's about how we're going about it. It's about our culture and our values, and not just writing them on the wall because it sounds good or handing out the laminated cards, but actually leading from it and walking the walk on that stuff every day, recruiting against it, onboarding against it, developing against it, evaluating performance against it. And these are some of the things I think organizations can do to begin to mitigate unintended consequences. I'll give you a shining example at LinkedIn. We launched a product recently that some of you may have seen called Ask for a Referral. And it's quite logical for us. It's very intuitive. So it enables people who are searching for jobs on LinkedIn to tap the power of their networks to open the door within these organizations or to get introduced to the hiring manager or the recruiter. And just by way of example, raise your hand if you've ever gotten a job because of someone you've known who opened a door for you or made a reference or, okay. So you can see the number of hands that went up, and sure enough, we launched this product, and it turned out that people that were leveraging Ask for a Referral on LinkedIn were 8 times more likely to get hired. 8 times. And it doesn't just work for the member, it works for all of you because you now have a more effective, efficient process to find talent. So we were celebrating this. It worked for the members, it worked for the customers, that works for LinkedIn. And our head of social impact, a woman named Meg Garlinghouse, who was actually coincidentally just in Singapore, she came into my office and she said about this Ask for a Referral product that we just launched, I understand that people are excited about this, but have we thought about the unintended consequences? I said, what do you mean? She said, what about the people that don't already have a network? What about the people that didn't go to the fancy schools and have the great diploma or haven't worked at a hot company and know all the people that can open the doors? What about those people? And these are people that Meg and myself and other colleagues at LinkedIn have had the opportunity to mentor or advise outside of the organization who have many, if not all, of the raw materials, the aptitude by virtue of what they've overcome in their lives to be incredibly successful and given an opportunity. But this product we launched, it creates a vicious cycle for them because it's facilitating the way in which people who have the networks are getting the jobs. And it's not like you're just looking for those people, it's an unintended consequence. And so it was with that in mind that we undertook an initiative that we call the Career Hub, which was originally called the Opportunity Marketplace, that now enables every member of LinkedIn who doesn't necessarily have the connections, didn't necessarily go to the right schools or have had the right jobs, to raise their hand and ask for help, ask for advice, ask for mentorship, and for other people on LinkedIn who have those experiences to volunteer to help them. And within several months of launching that, we had over 1 million people ask for help, and we had over 1 million people volunteer to help them. And that's just after a few months. But that wouldn't have been possible if we weren't asking ourselves these difficult questions and confronting our own success. And I think that's the power of proactively trying to anticipate unintended consequences.
That's very cool. So.
Piyush, what about you? What do you think?
Well, I think same thing. I think jobs is an obvious one. You talked about it in your presentation. I think though the follow-up point, I think there are also new jobs being created, and we talked about other kinds of skills you need. So I think that will happen. I think, however, the biggest opportunity that you will see is a dramatic increase in entrepreneurship in general. So to your point of people working for themselves, when you think about, I talked about Max Weber and the bureaucracy. We just think about the nature of today's corporation. It's really an outcome of the Industrial Revolution and Henry Ford. He figured that to make cars, you need big assembly lines and you need to get scale. And so he started creating big companies and the General Motors and the large mega multinational corporation that, came from there. If you look at the world before that, it's guild labor, it's apprenticeship, it's small scale enterprise, right? So what does the internet do? The internet actually allows you to get global scale without having the big corporation, this thing and so on. You can be in a garage and you can plug into a global supply chain and you can plug into a global distribution network. So I think the opportunities that the technology creates to really catalyze entrepreneurship, I think that would be a big shift as well. So I think there's an answer to the jobs thing in some ways. I think the issue around cybersecurity continues to be a big issue. I think no matter what you do, the bad actors, the dark web guys, they're one step ahead of you. And so I just think that for everybody, it's not a matter of if but when. Somebody's going to get in. So then the question really is, how do you protect against that? Obviously, the solution of going back to a pre-Holocene age and not do computers is not viable. So, but I think we're going to have to think really hard about, how do you create appropriate protection, at least an ability to do surveillance, to do quarantine, to be able to react and respond if you have incidents and events. I think that's going to continue to be a challenge. I think privacy is one of those things where I think we as society just don't know what we want. And I think it's easy to say, I need control of privacy. I think in 3 years from now, 5, with 5G and IoT, just forget about any notion of I will control my data and privacy. All the data in the world, 90% of it got made in the last 2 years. I can tell you in the next 5 years, the data that will get created is 100x, not 2x or 3x, because your shoe, your shirt, my glasses, your vacuum cleaner, your machine, everything's going to be pumping data about you all the time, 24/7. You open the door of your fridge, the data will get pumped out. When GDPR happened earlier this summer, I got 100 emails saying you've changed your privacy profile or this is about updating me. After the first 2, I deleted the emails. I mean, my brain couldn't handle it. So can you imagine trying to handle a million things where you got to go and say, I agree, I agree, I agree. It's going to be really hard. So I think the question of privacy is you're probably going to have to move from a world of ex-ante control, I agree, to an ex-post world where we're going to have to think about appropriateness of use. And my favorite analogy is a gun versus a knife. A gun you control through licensing. A knife you can buy anywhere. You control through making sure I don't use it to stab someone. I use it to eat food. So it's an ex-post control. I think we're going to have to think about privacy, but there's going to be a challenge. But the other problem is that we also keep changing our minds about data. We're okay about data used in some context. Tomorrow we do it differently. And frankly, what we say is different from what we do. If I ran a poll right now saying how many people in this room are happy with being traced and tracked 24/7 all the time so people know where you are, nobody is. But on the other hand, all of you have location on your mobile phones and use Google Maps the whole time. So what does that mean? So I think privacy is going to be a big challenge. And finally, the question on AI, I think, is going to also be extraordinarily difficult because as soon as you get to these neural models where they're not even explainable, right? And so you get to say nobody knows why the machine did what the machine did. It starts getting very tricky. And it also results in outcomes like exclusion as opposed to inclusion. Again, my favorite example of this, you think about insurance. Insurance exists as an industry because we all don't know who's going to have the bad time, and so we agree to share the risk, right? And so, we all put premium, we all get insured. Now, what happens when you have too much information? So when we know for a fact, based on your gene typing, that you're definitely getting cancer, and I'm definitely not. So guess what?
Wait, can we switch that around?
All right. I'm definitely getting
What happened?
But the point is this,
Oh God.
that in that circumstance, I don't want insurance because I know I don't need it. And he can't get insurance because no insurance company will insure him. End of insurance model, right? So I think there are a lot of things. Now, this goes back to, I don't want to sound dystopian. I think the answers, though, are in our hands. And this has happened before. In the 16th and 17th century, mankind and civilization moved consciously from a value system architected around valor, conquest, to a value system architected around the market forces and capitalism. So there's a very good book called The Passions and Interests. We say we moved from the passion of conquest to the passion of avarice, greed. And this thing of greed is good became the guiding key. But society evolved. It wasn't done randomly. Adam Smith came up with the economics, but the whole bunch of philosophers, think tanks, and writers over 100 years made the case for how society should evolve and organize itself over those 200 years. So we've done it before. And I think we can do it again.
How interesting. So is there anything that is very unique that you see in this Southeast Asia region because you are so involved in expanding the footprint of DBS Bank in this part of the world?
I frankly, because I'm in this part of the world, it's hard for me to comment on what's unique relative to other parts of the world. But I'll tell you a couple of things which are happening. One, we are a much younger population than the US and Europe. And I think that's relevant. The average age in Asia is 26, 27. The countries here with the average age is 19, 20, and 21, compared to the US and Europe's almost 40 years old. And obviously, therefore, a more youthful population means you have that many more digital natives and people who just automatically think about things differently. But it's not just the fact that they can, use their gadgets and they do gaming. Is that their views on life are different. How they feel about data privacy is very different to how the older generation feels. And so we got to think a little bit about how do you embrace that. The other thing that's happening, which I find really interesting, in Asia, especially Southeast Asia, we've for long tried to create this integrated vision of an integrated ASEAN. But we believe in this ASEAN way, so we don't have Brussels, we don't have EU. The ASEAN ways, you let countries move at their own pace. And so the progress has been slow. You do it bilaterally. In the last 3-5 years, it's quite clear that technology and the private sector transcends that. So when you have Grab, when you have Gojek, when you have AirAsia, a lot of these private sector companies and brands which are beginning to proliferate in the region digitally, I think you'll wind up with a coalescing of the region quicker than we've been able to achieve in the last 10, 20 years.
So speaking of younger workers, Jeff, do you have, can you share with us what you think workers can do to future-proof themselves and ensure their employability? And what skills do you think are most crucial?
Yeah, so I think Olivier started to touch on this, but interpersonal skills is something that's far too easily overlooked. And for at least 2 reasons, I think taking the time to improve communication skills, leadership skills, collaboration skills is essential. I think one reason is because people can learn those skills now, and unlike generating a PhD in AI, which is going to take years and years and may not be for everybody, there's not a person that can't improve these interpersonal skills. And some people will have greater ability than others, but all of us at any time can improve on these areas. And the second, to Olivier's point earlier, while it's not future-proofing per se, despite the rise of AI, it's going to be years before machines and computers are able to truly replicate interpersonal dynamics between people. And some of the things that really make us unique in terms of creativity, although now you do have some AI artists and AI composers, and it'll be interesting to see the way that continues to evolve. But I think those interpersonal skills are absolutely essential. I think digital fluency, just basic digital building blocks. So sending email, which I think those in this room take this stuff for granted, but using a spreadsheet, putting together a presentation, word processing, to future-proof folks in the economy who are ultimately going to be displaced. It's absolutely critical that they have these basic foundational skills, because ultimately when they're in a position where they need to reskill, if they have to learn more than one skill at a time, it becomes almost prohibitive. So having a strong foundation will enable individuals to reskill faster. And that's kind of the current workforce. I think some of this starts in primary school, secondary school. And the younger we can get to kids and really start to emphasize things that go beyond rote learning and the commodities.
Do you want to talk about the 5C? I like that a lot.
We're going into 5Cs. We're going into 5Cs here. But exactly your point about Henry Ford and the assembly line. At least in Western society, in the post-industrial revolution, schools were very much designed to produce workers that would be effective within those environments. In the world we live in today, this more global network digital world, it requires different skills. And here in Singapore, I'm sure you all fully appreciate it, or in Southeast Asia, leveraging some of the best practices of Singapore, the educational system here is just mind-blowing. And it's now become a best practice that developed countries and now developing countries are leveraging all over the globe. So I do think there are things that we can certainly begin to instill in our children as early as primary school that would make all the difference. So creativity, as I mentioned earlier, critical reasoning, especially. So we've been talking about critical reasoning now for years and years, long before fake media started to really become an issue and tip. And by the way, the fake media we've seen thus far to date is nothing compared to the kind of fake media that's going to come. The ability to replicate an individual and how they speak and their mannerisms and body language, and to put words in their mouth or to create a scene that never took place, it's going to be really challenging for people to be able to discern between what is real and what is not. And so at very young ages, we need to teach our kids critical reasoning and how to question things and not to just take things at face value. And you can see the destruction that can be wrought by virtue of that happening on a global basis. So that's going to be important. Collaboration and the ability to work well with others, understanding your own strengths and weaknesses, understanding how to complement yourself with people who have similar sense of purpose, similar and aligned values, but different skills. is so important, and it's really difficult to do anything on your own these days and truly be a success, certainly within a corporate environment. So the ability to collaborate is going to be essential. Coming back to the interpersonal skill thing, communication, oral communication, increasingly written communication is not something our school systems historically focused on. It was more about reading, and it was more about math and analytical skills, and the ability to effectively communicate through writing, I think, is going to be important. And then lastly is compassion. I think compassion sounds like a nice to have. It sounds like a virtue, that it's higher up in the hierarchy of needs. But I don't think that should be the case. I think it should be fundamental. I think compassion should be prioritized within the school system, the way we focus on analytics and verbal reasoning and just the basics. And I think there's an argument that compassion underlies all of it. And we talked earlier about the importance of ensuring that the folks that are going to be designing the artificial intelligence of the future understands the importance and the value of ethics and what it means to be human and how to treat other people. And I think those are the folks that need to study compassion and understand, for example, the difference between empathy and compassion, and to be able to manage compassionately, and the ability to be in the moment and become more mindful and think about where the other person's coming from and understand things outside of your own egocentric view of the world. To relate better with others, to forge connections rather than just constantly assume nefarious intention. And you see it in the world today where there's the rise of tribalism, and we just are increasingly surrounding ourselves with people that think like we do and look like we do. And social media and new technologies enable us to do that at a scale that wasn't possible historically, but it's moving in the wrong direction. And we need to increasingly find points of commonality and treat each other with compassion and forge connections, because there's a lot of big challenges facing the world right now, and we need to come together to solve those problems, not be tearing each other down.
I know that
I want
you
to
guys,
add, I'll add two this thing. One is, I think, adaptability. And I think that links to the last thing, which is the capacity to take risk. If the world is going to be more entrepreneurial like I think it is, I think everybody has the same ingredients. You can, open source the technology, you can get an idea and so on. But very few people know how to take risk and get into some stuff. Right? And so I think, and that comes from doing. So some of these things, you've got to be able to experiment and take some risk, and then you figure it's okay and fail a couple of times. The great thing about the US is it encourages risk-taking. And so to say I had 4 failed startups is a badge of honor. In other parts of the world, like here, you fail the first time, you can't get a bank account ever again, right? So I think we need to get people to be more comfortable with taking risk, and that's a taught skill. And like I said, the things keep changing. No matter how well you think you call the future, 3 months from now it'll be different, and 3 years from now for sure it'll be different. You just have to be adaptable.
Yeah, I love how the 5 C's and 2 A's.
Yeah, to build on this point about adaptability, one thing I almost take for granted at this point, because it is being taught. It's being taught in my daughter's elementary school, and Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, teaches all of the employees of Microsoft, is the importance of growth mindset. And I think it's very similar to your point about adaptability, and it can be taught, and it should be taught. This idea that it's okay not to know something and not to shy away from a challenge, and it's okay to fail. To the extent we can instill that in our children, I think it really starts to teach the importance of being adaptive and taking risks.
And Jeff, you have been a practitioner, a vocal proponent of compassionate leadership. Can that be taught as well?
Oh, undoubtedly. So the first time I learned about compassion, I read a book that talked about the difference between compassion and empathy. It was a book called The Art of Happiness. And the book didn't focus as much on the ability to teach compassion. It was many years later, I stumbled across a documentary called A Class Divided. I'm not sure if anyone here has seen it or heard of it. PBS Frontline documentary many, many years ago. There was a teacher in the United States named Jane Elliott, and she was a white woman in a white school, and I believe it was Iowa. And the day after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, she felt like she had had enough with bigotry and discrimination and racism, and she felt like she needed to do something about it. So she divided her class into 2 halves, the light-eyed kids and the dark-eyed kids. I think it was a 3rd grade class. And on the first day, she told the light-eyed kids that they were better than the dark-eyed kids, that they were smarter, that they were more capable, and she gave them all the privileges for the remainder of that day. So if they wanted to go get a drink of water, they could go first, and they didn't have to do the homework and so forth and so on. And the light-eyed kids were starting to lord over the dark-eyed kids, and the dark-eyed kids started to become shells of themselves in a very short period of time. But the real learning came the next day when she said she had made a mistake and that the dark-eyed kids were superior to the light-eyed kids. And the light-eyed kids they couldn't cope. And the dark-eyed kids, rather than treat the light-eyed kids crummy the way the light-eyed kids had the day before, they had been on the receiving end of it. So they had learned how not to behave. So what was so fascinating about this was they tracked these kids, not in the creepy privacy way we were talking about earlier, but they didn't have that back then. It's the 60s. They tracked these kids and they caught up with them like 10, 15 years later, and almost to a person in this class, they were members of the civil rights movement. They had dedicated their life to creating equality. And I ended up watching that and thinking to myself, this most definitely can be taught. And it's something we, as you know, we teach at LinkedIn. We teach the importance of managing compassionately and the difference between compassion and empathy, and how to develop a mindfulness practice that enables you to become a spectator of your own thoughts, especially when you become emotional. And that it's human nature to be egocentric, that it's challenging to do this day in and day out, especially in tense situations where there's friction and conflict. And the fact that compassion is not conditional. One of the most frequently asked questions I get is, I get this compassion thing and it's really easy with people I like, but what am I supposed to do with the people I don't like? And the answer is that compassion is not conditional, and it's most important when you don't have a natural connection with the other person. So yes, it definitely can be taught, it should be taught. It's something I'm working on outside of LinkedIn in the United States. A company called Everfi and I have partnered to create a curriculum called the Compassion Project, which we're going to essentially open source, and hopefully it's going to be taught in every school in the United States. And then if that works, we want to expand that globally as well.
It's very nice. What do you do in LinkedIn to teach compassionate leadership?
So
apart from telling people about it.
Yeah, we be more compassionate. That's we're done. We're done here. I mean, we've developed classes on it. We have learning development materials on it. All of our leadership, all of our managers understand the importance. They coach their teams on it. It's something we try to reinforce and not just talk about, but really try to walk the walk on.
And Piyush, you know, having transformed DBS to where it is today, I'm really curious.
We have a good team which is done in my... I tell people, by the way, as everybody knows, our senior management team is mostly women. So I tell people, my job is to look pretty. So they know how to transform.
So leadership style, looking pretty is one of your leadership style then. Can you tell me more about your leadership style?
I don't know how to describe leadership. I'm a big believer in culture. So I think one of the first roles of a leader is to determine, culture and intent. So what do you really want to be? What do you want to stand for? What's the soul of the organization? How do you want to work together? So I put a lot of effort in trying to make sure you have culture. I'm a big believer in alignment. I think strategy, like I say, you put 10 good kids in a room and by and large you'll come up with plus minus the same strategy. The question is, how do you get everybody to march to the same rhythm? And that takes a lot of work. So how do you get alignment in the system? So I do that. And I do think that there's some things which require my, attention. So I go deep and I can be fairly detailed. There are other things which I think it's okay. So I give people a lot of rope and a lot of room to operate if I don't think they need too much guidance and attention. So.
I love how you guys sum it up. You've got the 5 C's: creativity, critical reasoning, collaboration, communication, compassion. And 2 A's, and I just added another A, sure. Adaptable, ability to take risks, and alignment. Yeah. 5 C's and 3 A's. Well, against the challenges that all of you have articulated in terms of the macro trends, how do you think organizations, or how do you think, yourself, Piyush, you're using data and insights to help address the talent challenges that your organization is facing today?
I think data is a game changer for everything. People sometimes call data the new oil. I think that's a fallacy. I think data is the new air. Because oil you can still own. I own the oil. Data is going to be just completely everywhere. I talked about, when you have IoT and 5G, how do you control the data? So the question is, how best can you use data in an intelligent way to give you insights which you did not have before? And our HR team's done some fabulous work. So for example, in hiring, we had the same problem as everybody. We got 100,000 applications. And the way we hired people was, which college did you come from, what's a CGPA? And then you create a short list and then you interview the short list. Now, the reality is that what college you went to and your CGPA has nothing to do with the skill sets that you need on the job and what attributes you're really looking for. So the team, when working with some startup, created a tool. It's called JIM, Jobs something Maestro, Jobs Intelligent Maestro. Anyway, so the JIM thing is an AI tool, and it allows people to actually put in a little bit about themselves, their profile. They take some modeling test, psychographic. It's a chatbot. So the computer takes care of everything. You talk to the computer, natural language comes up with the stuff. But essentially, it allows you to create a shortlist, which is very different from a shortlist you would have created traditionally. And that changes the whole paradigm. We found that by using this, our attrition rates in the particular wealth management planners we started with first came down from 20% to 6%, because you're just hiring the right people. You're hiring much better people. So data can make a big difference. They also did another thing. They worked with the data scientists in Singapore at A-Star, and I forget, 136 variables these people use, including what time you come in, how many times you get on email, how many times you update your LinkedIn profile, I bet. But based on that, they can now predict with 86% accuracy people who are going to quit in the next 9 months. And so now you have the possibility of being able to inform managers with a high degree of accuracy that this person is disengaged, going to quit. And of course, you have a choice then. Do you want to work with the person, intelligent or not? So we're doing that. We're using a lot more analytics. So I'm really intrigued by your analytics tool. It sounds really exciting to me, and I think we can do a lot with it. But for the time being, we also have a lot of internal data which goes waste. I've got history of data on 25,000 people and what works and what doesn't. And what we started doing is being able to mine our own data and come up with a whole set of very powerful analytics on what seems to work, whether it's in learning development, whether it's on talent, whether it's on mobility, who does well, who doesn't do well, what tools seem to work. We've dashboarded the whole thing, and every one of the businesses units now gets the dashboard for the drivers and variables that they should focus on. Now, you couldn't do any of this stuff even 3 years ago.
Jeff, what about within LinkedIn or your observation about leading organizations that uses data or insights to help them with their talent challenges?
Yeah, I mean, data is so central. I love the analogy with oil and air. I think you're spot on. I've also referred to it as our lifeblood. I mean, it makes the company go, and it powers the entire ecosystem. With regard to talent specifically, we've also developed some really interesting algorithms or some insights around the recruiting process, around unconscious bias and fighting unconscious bias in terms of the way job descriptions are created. Or the way that you pass along language in a job description over many years. And it can crowd out people who are using specific kinds of language and words on their LinkedIn profile. And so encouraging people to either change the job description or change the way they're describing themselves, I think has made an enormous difference. But one of the things we're most excited about, we're in the process of acquiring a company called Glint. How many of you are familiar with Glint? It's an employee engagement process. So not as many here in Singapore, which is not altogether surprising for Southeast Asia. It's a US-based company, but one of the reasons we're so excited about it is now we can help scale and accelerate that scale on a global basis. And Glint measures employee engagement. So it's a survey mechanism within an organization. So you can pulse your employees. And at LinkedIn, we've been using it. We like the product so much we bought the company, but we've been using it now for a couple of years. And on a biannual basis, we'll pulse all of our employees. And there's roughly 50 or so questions that you can get through in just a few quick minutes. And then there's a place for commentary. And it enables us to track and trend over time our ability to not just talk the talk in terms of what we're trying to accomplish and how we're trying to accomplish it, but whether or not we're walking the walk, and whether or not our employees are feeling it and experiencing it, and where we're falling short, and providing us clarity in terms of the specific functional areas, the specific managers, where there's room for improvement, and slicing and dicing that data based on the strength of Glint's analytical capability is a complete game changer. So we're really excited about our ability to share this capability with the world. And ultimately, I think what we're going to find once we start to dig in and do the right research is that employee engagement is going to be highly, highly correlated with long-term value creation. And I envision a day where every board in the world, regardless of whether it's a publicly traded company, a private company, a nonprofit, even educational organizations and the board of supervisors or superintendents, are going to be able to pulse the employees. They're going to be able to pulse and find out the extent to which those organizations are creating the right levels of engagement, and to the extent they're falling shy of where the bar should be set in terms of long-term value creation, developing an action plan and working with the heads of these organizations to ensure that they're on the right path. And I think that day is fast approaching where this data becomes one of the most important measures and predictors of value creation.
Well, I'm sure I would love to get to know all of you, both of you, a little better on the personal front. So to wrap up, maybe you can tell us, what's your go-to karaoke song, Jeff and Piyush?
You got a go-to karaoke?
I don't have a go-to karaoke song. In fact, frankly, I refuse to sing. The minute I sing, the hall empties. I'm happy to tell you my go-to poem, though. So it's from, I love Alice in Wonderland. So my favorite quotes are all from Alice in Wonderland. And there's a para in that from how does it go? The time has come, the walrus said, to talk of many things, of shoes and ships and sealing wax and cabbages and kings, and why the sea is boiling hot, and whether pigs have wings. So you can be happy with that.
Pigs have wings.
That was a very interesting little pivot there, my friend.
That's quick.
That's
quick.
That's very quick. We're on to you, though. So for me, my go-to karaoke song is Sweet Caroline. I will not be performing it here right now.
I like that too, though.
But
Neil Diamond is great.
There's a reason I believe it's a good karaoke song. So I'm going to leave you not just with the song, but my 3 tips on good karaoke song selection. So tip number 1, most people who are about to sing karaoke will gravitate towards their favorite songs. And most of our favorite songs were sung and performed by some of the world's greatest musicians and singers. And if you were one of the world's greatest musicians and singers, you would be a professional singer, not necessarily performing karaoke. So the first tip is to think twice about gravitating towards your favorite song, recognizing that some of those songs are out of your key and that you may not have the expertise. So for guys in particular, just speaking as a guy, Queen, Freddie Mercury, no-no. Journey, it's a big no-no. George Michael, Elton John. I mean, these are people you just
But
don't
John
try
Denver
to.
you could do.
John Denver, well, this is interesting because you're leading me to the other 2 tips, and John Denver's not bad. So second rule is you want to pick something that's a little slow. You guys didn't think I was serious about this, did you? They're all like, what is he doing? So second rule, slower tempo. Slower tempo is just easier to sing. Faster tempo just increases the degree of difficulty. You don't need to increase the degree of difficulty. John Denver sings a little slower. But here's the real reason John Denver is great and Sweet Caroline is great. It's the third rule. It's all about getting the crowd to sing along. Because at the end of the day, good karaoke is like effective public speaking. It's not necessarily what you're saying or how you're singing. It's about how the crowd feels about what you're saying or how you're singing. There's that, and if you get the crowd to sing, they can't hear how bad you are.
So that's the main trick, believe me.
And with that, I'm so thankful to have the chance to host all of 2 of you. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Sean. Well done. All right, Jeff, good to see you.
Thank you.